Welcome to Reaching Out. I'm Gregory Floyd, President Local 237 Teamsters. With us today, our public advocate, Bill de Blasio. Bill, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Greg. It's good to see you.
Actually,
since our travels together not long ago.
Yes, we were both in Israel together last week in August. And I want to say welcome back to the show because this is your second time on the show.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here.
Thank you. While we were in Israel, an event occurred just when you came back. Stop and frisk policy, one of your staff members was arrested at the West Indian Day Parade on Labor Day.
Yep. You know, the trip to Israel, one of the things I thought as soon as I agreed to do it was I'm going to be back in time for the Labor Day Parade. I was looking forward to it, and the day itself, as you know, proceeded beautifully until the very end. At the end, even though things were quite quiet, Councilmember Jamani Williams and Kirsten Foy, one of my senior staff, were both arrested, or detained, I guess is the exact term, and I think very inappropriately so. We're still waiting for an investigation, but I think what we saw was a real overreaction by some of the police there. And what I really admire about Jamani and Kirsten is that they did not say, let's talk about ourselves. They immediately turned it into a bigger discussion about where we need to go as a city, the kind of changes we need to look at in the relationship between community and police, and particularly in the stop and frisk policy. Because this situation, it is affecting young people of color, young men of color in particular, all over this city in a way that I think is ultimately counterproductive.
The police didn't know the councilman and the other person was a member of your staff?
Well, here's the troubling thing, and again, I think Kirsten and Jamani pointed this out very well. Even if they hadn't known they were public officials, they still should have been treated with respect, and there still should have been an attempt at dialogue. What they were saying is, hey, we want to go over to a reception, a luncheon that was maybe a couple hundred yards away. Not exactly a national security crisis, something that could have been worked through. But what did make this worse was here were two young black men, one of whom was an elected councilman, the other of whom was a senior appointed member of government through my office. They did have ID. They showed their ID. They attempted to explain who they were, and that wasn't listened to. And I think that's what makes this so additionally troubling. I went in and out of that area a number of times without incident. I was wearing informal clothing. All I had was a little ID, and people took my word for it. But these two guys went through something much worse. So we're waiting again for an investigation, but more to the point, a little bit of the tip of the iceberg phenomenon here. This is another reminder that we've got a problem. We shouldn't deny it. We've got a problem in police community relations, particularly when it comes to young men of color. It's not something we should accept. It's something we can do a lot better on. And by the way, for everyone who cares first and foremost about public safety, I believe the highest form of the highest way to get to public safety is to deepen the connection between police and community, not have a segment of our population feeling rightfully like they're being treated differently or wrongly.
Right. And the other side is there were two people of positions in power here in New York City, and they got treated that way. So someone is thinking, well, how would the average person or less than average person be treated?
Greg, you're right, and it's even more ironic because these are two people who have devoted their lives, their adult lives, to trying to improve the relationship between police and community. Kirsten did tremendous work with Reverend Sharpton, working with families in very, very difficult situations, trying to, heal, trying to bring peace, trying to bring a dialogue. And what an irony that this happens to the peacemakers.
Yes.
And Kirsten ended up being, roughed up in the process in this incident. Jamani said that just a year earlier he'd been pulled over by a police officer in his own council district who asked, while driving, and the officer asked very pointedly, he wanted evidence that it was his own car. Now here's a council member, a city council member in his own car being asked to prove it's his own car. I say to people, look, let's be blunt. In this case, there's two New Yorks. I talk to people all over the city, 5 boroughs. When I talk to people in white neighborhoods and explain that this is a phenomenon and how troubling it is to families in neighborhoods of color, there's genuinely a look of shock on people's face. And I say, would you want this happening to your teenage, son? or your college-age son, would you want this happening? And of course, no one would want their privacy invaded unless they had done something wrong, unless there was a specific reason.
Yes.
We had a gathering at DC 37 last week to talk about an action plan on this issue, and State Senator Eric Adams gave a very clear explanation of when it is a specific, when there is a need for stop and frisk. No one should, in my opinion, should say, get rid of stop and frisk. You maintain the policy, you use it accurately, carefully, when needed. And Senator Adams laid out, as a former police officer himself, the conditions for using it properly. But 90% plus of the young people in particular, 90% plus of all New Yorkers stopped and frisked have done nothing wrong. And
right.
that's not a good policy.
I want to change the topic. I want to talk about the attacks on labor. And in New York State, I just saw that the Public Employees Federation just turned down a contract that the governor gave them, and unfortunately there are 3,500 pink slips going out, and the governor said that that contract would have saved $80 million. So to extract the $80 million in savings, he's going to implement 3,500 layoffs. Then I also saw in the same breath that he's going to allow the millionaire's tax to expire, which is $4 billion in revenue. So I'm trying to figure out this $80 million compared to $4 billion in the sacrificing of labor, as opposed to maybe both, the $80 million plus the $4 billion in revenue that the millionaires were paying.
You know, I think the most important thing to say here is that what's happened in other states is very different than what's happened in New York or Connecticut, for example. And I, as you know, I worked for Andrew Cuomo when he was the HUD secretary. I have a lot of respect for what he has done and his overall effort to fix the situation in Albany, which I think has succeeded in many ways. I would say what Chris Christie has done, what Scott Walker's done, what John Kasich has done, those are the kind of attacks that have been anti-labor through and through, anti-collective bargaining. I think Andrew Cuomo has had a much more balanced model. I think Governor Malloy in Connecticut has had a very balanced model. Look, I think the fact is that the Albany budget has been tremendously troubled. Now, I'm one of the people who does believe there's ways to get new revenue, and I think you and I agree on that. But I do want to be fair and say I think the governor has tried to work with labor, most notably, for example, during the Medicaid reform process, in a way that's constructive, and there's, it is an entirely different and better approach than what happened in those other states, where it was just blame labor, put the onus on labor, somehow try and convince people that collective bargaining was for the privileged few as opposed to a fundamental right.
Right.
Collective bargaining, thank God, is not under assault here.
Right. And we want to talk just a little bit about the Wall Street protests. And you and I were in Israel, and we saw the tent protests.
Yes.
And we spoke about that.
Yes, we did.
And we said, how long before that comes to our shore?
Yep.
And here it is.
Lo and behold.
It's here.
And when we were in Israel, Greg, it was everywhere. That's the thing that's amazing. Those protests, the social protest movement in Israel, which was very much about, housing and economic equity, issues like that, was literally everywhere we turned. It was amazing. In every city, you saw some manifestation of it.
Yeah, and the article that's on my Facebook page, I printed it for people could see. I posted it for people could see it. Suddenly, the rich are getting scared, and that was an article written by an Israeli journalist.
Right.
And how true that's ringing now. But when we see taxes on a federal level being cut for the very wealthy, and the rest of us are suffering. There are no job creations. Collective bargaining is being cut. Budgets are being balanced. Now we're talking about Social Security and Medicare being cut. And the millionaires and billionaires are getting their taxes cut. I think we're at a point where people are saying enough.
I think there's a tremendous sense of inequity and a sense that we can't possibly be on the right track, right? I mean, income stratification alone, what's happened to the income levels in this country where middle-class people have been in a steady decline. The rich have gotten richer in a kind of shocking and profound way. And, you don't have to be anti-rich to say that something's out of balance. And if middle-class people, working-class people are worried that they aren't going to be able to make it in the long term, their kids are going to have a worse lifestyle than they had, something's wrong with that picture that's profoundly different. I think that's what the Wall Street protests have started to crystallize.
This has been Reaching Out with Gregory Floyd, our very special guest, Bill de Blasio, public advocate. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you,
again.
my friend.
Thank you.